Starting off this list in a number 10 spot, we have The Family Inside the Manson Cult. You guys, this is the first documentary I watched when I started my subscription to Magellan TV, and it is honestly what got me hooked. The Family follows the Manson family cult, of course, and shows the days leading up to the day of the Tate and LaBianca killings. This documentary has interviews with people who were actually a part of the cult, and even includes Linda Kasabian, who was the getaway driver on that fateful night. The interviews are coupled with reenactments of the cult that really help the viewer dive into the late 1960s and the world that they were living in. This documentary gives us a very in-depth view as to how this cult worked, and shows us how the people in the cult were under the spell of Charles Manson himself. It is a pretty unbelievable story that ended in such tragedy, and this documentary really does an amazing job at showing us a part of the story that is not often talked about. Coming in at number 9, we have The Nightmare. The Nightmare, which is directed by Rodney Asher, follows the topic of sleep paralysis. This documentary premiered at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival and was widely well received. If you don't know, sleep paralysis is when a person finds themselves unable to move or speak while they are falling asleep or just waking up. This temporary paralysis is often accompanied by some pretty horrifying visions, and if you've ever experienced sleep paralysis or know someone who's experienced it, you know how terrifying it can be. This documentary follows people who have experienced sleep paralysis in their lives. The participants explain their experiences and hallucinations as the film reenacts what they've seen. The scariest part of this documentary is when they mention that just knowing about sleep paralysis can be enough to cause you to experience it. In our number 8 spot today, we have There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane. There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane is an absolute whirlwind of a documentary. It follows different interviews with family and friends of Diane Schuler. You might currently be wondering who Diane Schuler is. Well, Diane Schuler was a woman who passed away in 2009 after she was driving her van into oncoming traffic and ended up crashing head-on into another vehicle. Between the two cars involved in the collision, all 8 passengers ended up passing away, so it truly was a pretty gruesome and tragic event. The documentary strives to put together what exactly happened and why this completely avoidable accident occurred in the first place. After the accident, Diane's toxicology report showed that she was intoxicated with both alcohol and THC, but no one in the family knew Diane to abuse either of these substances, as well as the fact that when she was last seen, right before the accident, no one believed she appeared to be intoxicated at all. This documentary really tries to put together all of the missing pieces of what happened on July 26th, 2009, and is one of the most thrilling documentaries I've seen. In our number 7 spot today, we have Dreams of a Life. Dreams of a Life is a documentary following the story of Joyce Carol Vincent. Joyce was a 36-year-old woman who was found in her home in 2006, almost 3 years after she had passed away. The details around her death have become a mystery due to the time it took them to find her and all of the decomposition that had already happened. How could a 36-year-old woman not be reported missing for all that time? How had no one noticed for 3 years? When she was found, the TV was still on and she had wrapped but unmarked Christmas gifts surrounding her. The documentary follows the case and investigation as well as different interviews with people who knew Joyce so that we really get a sense of who she was and what her life was like. This documentary really leaves you on edge as you want to know all of the answers to the questions that Joyce's passing brings. In our number 6 spot today, we have The Staircase. The Staircase is one of the most classic true crime staples as it is one of the most widely debated cases ever. In 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead in her home. This docuseries follows the investigation, a few of the theories surrounding the case, and the trial. Kathleen was found at the bottom of the stairs of her home, and while it was originally regarded as a fatal but accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolds, the truth gets muddier and muddier. Kathleen's husband, Michael, has always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list, considering he was the last one to see her alive and was actually home and was supposedly in the backyard when the fall occurred. From theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl, there's a lot of speculation about this case, and this documentary is definitely one to watch if you're a true crime lover. In our number 5 spot today, we have Cropsey. Cropsey is a documentary from 2009 that became much different and much bigger than it originally set out to be. It was created by Josh Zeman and Barbara Brancaccio as they set out to make a documentary about the New York urban legend necropsy, which is a boogeyman type character. But what they discovered was so much more real and horrifying. This documentary research led them to the very real story of Andre Rand, who is a convicted kidnapper and suspected killer. While this documentary is a bit slower than some of the others on this list, it is so unbelievably spooky, you definitely should not watch this one alone. It shows how one terrible man's actions instilled fear into the residents of Staten Island and inspired an urban legend that is still talked about to this day. In our number 4 spot today, we have The Donner Party. The Donner Party is a documentary coming from 1992, and man, is it a wild one. The documentary follows the Donner Party, who were a group of American pioneers. The Donner Party set out in the spring of 1846 in a wagon train in an attempt to migrate from Missouri to California, but they got stuck for the entire winter in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The documentary follows the hardships they had to endure while they were out there, and it truly is shocking. There is a mix of real photographs, letters, and journal entries from the Donner Party, as well as footage of the trail they were on and testimonies from experts on what exactly went wrong. The Donner Party was trapped with little food, and they ended up being stuck for 5 whole months. The survivors had to resort to cannibalism in order to survive, so it was, of course, an extremely dire and horrible situation. This documentary is both extremely informative, but it is also absolutely terrifying when you remember that this really did happen. In our number 3 spot today, we have The Woman Who Wasn't There. This 2012 documentary is about Alicia Head. Alicia claimed to have been on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center when they were attacked on September 11th, 2001, and she said that her fiancé had been in the other tower and had unfortunately passed away. This is of course a terrible story that shocked people, and it led to Alicia being the president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network group. Eventually though, it comes to light that Alicia wasn't at the World Trade Center that day. She wasn't even in the country. This documentary aims to unravel all of the lies she's told and detail how this all happened. This documentary is certainly a bit different than the other ones on this list, but it truly does leave you with such an eerie feeling, because how could someone lie like that and get away with it for so long? In our number 2 spot today, we have The Imposter. The Imposter follows the story of the Barkley family and the horror that they had to endure. In 1994, Nicholas Barkley, who was 13 years old at the time, went missing. His family was of course scared and terribly upset, but 3 years later, Nicholas returned. Of course, the family was overjoyed, but that joy quickly turns to fear, as it turns out Nicholas is not Nicholas at all, but instead a man named Frederick Borden, who is a French con man who actually spends his life impersonating missing children to their families. This documentary aims to show the events that led up to one man spending his life preying on innocent, grieving families. The story itself and the idea that someone could do that really is unbelievable, so this documentary is one you absolutely do not want to miss. In our number 1 spot today, we have Don't Mess with Cats, Hunting an Internet Killer. When I say that this was one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I really mean it. From the moment I started it, I could not stop until it was finished. This documentary follows the story of the killing of Lynn June, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz and who was posting some pretty horrific videos before this crime even happened. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos and who were intent on finding out who he was and where he was before this killing happened. The crimes themselves are absolutely horrible, the story is almost unbelievable, but the work the cyber sleuths do is honestly incredible. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It is really hard to watch because of how tragic it is, but it is definitely worth it if you can get through it.
Starting us off at number 10 are the confession tapes. Oh my god, I watched the first episode of this a few years ago at my sister's place, and I got so disturbed I did not go home and sleep at home. I was like, no, I'm not sleeping over there, ain't no one killing me today, haha, no. Released on Netflix back in 2017, the show is a true crime documentary series that features a bunch of false confessions that ultimately lead to wrongful convictions, and they go into detail about the undercover sting operations that police undertake in order to get these people to confess to something they didn't do. It's dirty and it's horrible to just watch people getting manipulated like that, but you can't take your eyes away at the same time. There's 2 seasons, so around 11 episodes, so it's definitely pretty doable if you need a bit of a scare one night. I highly recommend it. Coming in at number 9 is Trial by Media. So I finished this one myself a few weeks ago and it was disturbing but needed, if that makes any sense. It came out on Netflix this year and it showcases how criminal cases and people's views can be so impacted by the media and its portrayal of events. And of course, I know we all know this already, but the documentary explores a memorable trial in each episode. For example, the first rape case trial to ever be televised in history, and how many supporters the perpetrators got after being convicted despite them being the bad guys. It's super interesting and very much worth the watch. You realize how easily extensive media coverage can affect the outcome of these trials. Everyone likes courtroom dramas like Suits, so imagine the real thing. At number 8 we have The Nightmare. Now if you want to meet the demons in your mind and the ones roaming around your bed when it's pitch black, then this is the documentary for you. Released in 2015, the docu-film focuses on sleep paralysis and everything that comes with it. The inability to move or speak or even react to whatever nightmare they're seeing. Sleep paralysis can induce hallucinations and physical experiences of the darkest of nature. The film had a bunch of participants share their experiences and then they recreated it. I'd probably hallucinate being underwater with a massive great white coming my way. I may not be able to move, but I can still definitely my bed. Filling our number 7 slot is Going Clear. I feel like every few years my obsession with Scientology comes back and I start watching all these documentaries and movies about it and I'm like, madness! This is a madness! No, it's not madness. No, this is a pyramid scheme, people. So released on HBO back in 2015, Going Clear is a 2-hour documentary showing the true nitty-gritty parts of the Church of Scientology. How members of the cult threaten and blackmail other members, and if you leave the church, they literally harass you. What other religion makes you pay thousands of dollars to achieve a higher level of enlightenment? The church drains your bank account in any way possible. Sea Org members sign their lives away by signing a billion-year contract and get a few dollars a week as allowance for all the shit that they do. It's such a secretive organization. No one has seen Kelly Miscavige in public for years, so it's like, did they kill her? What did they do to her? Did Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes divorce because of the church? Most likely. How can so many people follow a religion that comes from a science fiction novel? Keyword: fiction. Now at number 6 is Madness in the Fast Lane. Now I included the case of this documentary a while ago in another video, but here's the general premise. Back in May of 2008, Swedish twin sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson were filmed repeatedly running across a busy M6 highway. They were hit by oncoming traffic multiple times, and then Ursula even went under the wheels of a large truck, yet remained completely unharmed. As the twins were being talked to by police, one of them gets free and runs right in front of an oncoming lorry, and then the other one runs out and gets hit by a car. The lorry twin is in critical condition, but the other one is remarkably fine despite being in an accident that would usually kill someone. After being released, Sabina ends up stabbing a man to death a few days later, and apparently they both suffer from a very rare form of shared psychosis, where the mental health of one influences the other one's sanity. The documentary tries to make their behavior make sense with the help of a criminal psychiatrist. Coming in at number 5 is Dreams of a Life. This one really makes you think about who would truly miss you if you died. Released back in 2011, this drama documentary tells the story of Joyce Carol Vincent, a woman who was found dead in her London apartment back in 2006. Only problem was, she had died in December of 2003 and no one had noticed she was gone for 3 years. Her body was surrounded by her still wrapped Christmas presents and the TV on. How unbelievably sad. By the time they found her, her body had decomposed so much that there was no way to figure out how she had even died. So the documentary interviews people who knew Joyce, friends, exes, even acquaintances, to try and find out how someone can die so close to a busy street in one of the most populated cities in the world and not be noticed. At number 4 is Tabloids. This docu-film came out back in 2010 and it tells us about the love story of Joyce McKinney and Kirk Anderson. I mean, no, I wouldn't go as far as to call it that. But the story goes as normal. Boy and girl meet, they fall in love, but the boy turns out to be Mormon, the girl is not, and he becomes a missionary and is sent to London without even telling the girl or breaking up with her. See, not so common. Joyce became so paranoid about the church keeping them apart, she hired a pilot and bodyguard and went to London and essentially kidnapped Kirk. She took him to a house she had rented with handcuffs and other toys and repeatedly set assaulted him, but she of course said everything was consensual. Kurt claims she'd said she would continue until she got pregnant and actually forced him into her car at gunpoint. He then proposed to her in hopes that she would free him, and by then he was already reported as a missing person. The authorities eventually got involved, but seeing and hearing both sides of the story is just so disturbing. Like, Joyce literally thinks she's done nothing wrong. You may also know this case as the Mormon sex in chains case, which kind of sounds better than what I said. Filling at number 3 slot is Jesus Camp. I feel like Islamophobia has reached such an all-time high right now, and this documentary shows that pretty clearly. Most of you have probably heard of the 2006 documentary Jesus Camp because it was huge. It follows Kids on Fire, a Christian summer camp for kids where you'd think they'd be learning hymns and sermons and making friendship bracelets, but it's not even close. Their days are filled with preaching Islamophobia, homophobia, and a militant, violent call of action to anyone that doesn't have Christian beliefs. The camp teaches kids how they have prophetic powers and how they have to take America back in the name of Christ. They literally tell the kids that Muslim children in the East are taught the same thing about Americans and how they get taught how to use bombs and weapons in their own summer camps at that age, and of course how they should be doing the same. People have said it's the most authentic representation of the evangelical Christian community. I've actually seen this and it was pretty messed up. It attracted so much controversy that the camp actually got shut down, or rather rebranded. Now at number 2 is Titicut Follies. If there's one genre of documentaries I love more than any other, it's definitely the ones featuring old mental asylums and institutions and how everything worked back then. Yo, this video is making me realize I'm dark as hell. Either way, this documentary was released back in 1967, so it's probably the oldest one on the list, but it explores the lives of the patient inmates of Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane. It shows you how badly these people were treated, their empty cells, the fact they were force-fed and stripped in public. The superintendent would only let the director film subjects who were deemed the most mentally competent, which made the whole thing that much shadier. You guys have seen American Horror Story Asylum, like going on behind the scenes, we all know it. When it was released, the state got involved, claiming it violated the patient's privacy despite them all saying it was okay to be filmed. But really, the state was just worried because the documentary was making the state-owned institution look bad because it was bad. It was banned multiple times but then released again in 1991, and by that time it had already helped so many abusive psychiatric wards shut down. So I mean, go them. And finally, at number 1 is Abducted in Plain Sight. This one was the most popular true crime docufilm on Netflix for a really long time, and I can't even tell you how many times I hovered over it before working up the balls to actually watch it. It's released back in 2017. The film follows the kidnapping of Idaho teenager Jan Broberg Felt by her neighbor Robert Berchtold. And he didn't just kidnap her once, he kidnapped her twice. Reddit user Heather P12 even said it was plain creepy and messed up from the very first second. It was voted as best documentary 4 times, so I mean, you may as well watch it.
Starting off this countdown, we have Voyeur. This documentary surrounds Gerald Foes and the motel he bought in the 1960s. Basically, he got this motel and then rigged it so that he could spy on all of the guests that stayed there. In particular, he installed grills in the ceiling of most of the rooms. Then he would go up to the attic and he could watch the people in the room through these grills. In particular, he liked to watch people get it on. It's just very unsettling, and honestly, might make you want to rethink spending the night at a hotel. I swear, the next time I stay over anywhere, I'm inspecting the place top to bottom. And at number 9, we have The Inconvenient Truth. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up because it really helps us out, and I appreciate it, so hit it for me. Hit it, Fergie. I remember watching this documentary in grade 9 geography class, and it basically scared the crap out of me. Basically, the film is all about global warming and how humans are completely destroying the earth. It also talks about how if we don't change our ways, we could quite literally make Earth inhabitable, which is absolutely terrifying. It then goes into detail discussing all the things that are happening to the world because of climate change, like the glaciers melting, and how that is rising our sea levels and then causing flooding. The whole movie just really emphasizes how badly we need to make a change, because we have really messed up Earth. With that being said, this documentary will scare you into wanting to make a change. It did that for me, and now I'm conscious about the little things, like making sure I always toss away trash in the appropriate bins. And I try to thrift all my clothes instead of buying fast fashion. So maybe go watch this documentary if you kind of want a reality check. In our 8th spot, we have the Ted Bundy tapes. Ted Bundy was an infamous serial killer who is responsible for the death of 30 women, although it's thought that his number is probably much higher. The documentary Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, features real-life recordings of Ted Bundy. Some were taken while he was on death row. Apparently, he thought that by doing these interviews, he could push back the date of his death sentence. Also, he had a habit of manipulating the reporters, and you can hear it in his voice and how he answers some of the questions. I think the scariest thing is how he never said that this is what he did, but instead he worded it as if like, suppose I was in this situation, or this is what the killer might have done. So that was his way of admitting to his crimes without actually admitting to his crimes, which is very creepy. This documentary will give you the creeps. Just hearing everything he did and seeing crime scene photos, it's just a lot. Coming in at number 7, we have Unsolved Mysteries. Now, this is a documentary show, and I am absolutely addicted to it. Each episode discusses a new mystery that hasn't been solved, like the disappearance and murder of Ray Rivera. In 2006, one night, Ray got a phone call and then rushed from his home. That was the last time anyone had seen or heard Ray alive. Days later, his body was found in a hotel in Baltimore. Apparently, he had jumped from one building and then crashed through the roof of the hotel. Except so many things don't add up. Like how his glasses laid beside him with no scratches at all, and they weren't broken by the fall. His wife also found a mysterious cryptic code left behind by Ray, which was taped to the back of his computer. Sadly, we still don't know what really happened to Ray. Then there's another story about a hairdresser named Patrice. She disappeared from her work in just 13 minutes. We don't know what happened within those 13 minutes or who took Patrice's life. All these real life stories will have you on the edge of your seat. What sucks though is that they're unsolved, so you will desperately want to figure out what happened. While at the same time, you might kind of get paranoid watching this because, you know, it's all about scary abductions and murders. In our 6th spot, we have Deadly Dates. Who here is currently using a dating app? Maybe you're on Tinder or Bumble or Grindr, I don't know. Well, if you have a dating app, delete it right now. The documentary series Deadly Dates is all about the dark side of the web and the horrors of online dating. Because not everyone is how they appear to be online. Take the story of the young woman named Nadine, for example. Her story was featured in the first episode of Deadly Dates. Nadine met a man named Sammy Almari on a dating app. He told her he was a wealthy businessman and often spoiled her with gifts. They met up and everything was going fine until he became obsessed with her. And he was also very jealous. When Nadine tried to end the relationship, he ended up taking her life and then stole her phone to send taunting text messages to her family members. It's honestly a very dark case. I'm telling you, this series is gonna make you want to be single forever. It just shows you how scary people can really be, especially when you don't know everything about them. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Abducted in Plain Sight. This documentary really got to me. Basically, it's about a man named Robert Berchtold and his unhealthy obsession with the girl next door. Back in the 1970s, the Broberg family, consisting of Robert and Mary Ann and their 3 young daughters, Jan, Karen, and Susan, became really close to their next door neighbors, Robert Berchtold and his wife and kids. They became so close that they started referring to him as B, and he acted like the girl's second father. However, B became very obsessed with Jan, so much so that in 1974 he kidnapped her for 5 weeks. He groomed and brainwashed Jan and told her that they were abducted by aliens. He said the aliens assigned them with a mission to give birth to a child before her 16th birthday, or else, if they didn't, it would put her family at risk. He also fell in love with Jan and kept saying he was going to marry her. He also convinced Jan that she was meant to marry him. Then in 1976, B abducted Jan for a second time. He manipulated the family and Jan the entire time. Jan lived in constant fear that if she didn't do what the aliens were telling her to do, then her family would die as a result. Like, this is just an elaborate story all about brainwashing. It is so sick and twisted. The story will make you frustrated. In our 4th spot, we have The Faces of Death. This documentary is one that will change your life forever because it will literally scar you. It was so graphic that it was banned in 40 countries. It's just terribly gruesome. The film contains real footage of dead or dying humans and animals. In one scene, you see a body being sliced open in an autopsy. Another scene shows a man being electrocuted, and in another, you see a monkey get beat to death by a hammer. That's not all, the list goes on and on. There's just so much gruesome content shown in this film. It's basically like they collected the most disturbing real-life footages from all over the world and just compiled them together for this film. So, unless you never want to sleep again, don't watch this documentary. In our third spot, we have Food Inc. I had to watch this documentary back in high school, and it changed the way I looked at food for the longest time. Basically, it's all about how the entire food industry is run by only a couple of big organizations, and the way they are doing things aren't the most ethical. Like how chickens are being injected with so much hormones just to get them fatter, or how animals that are raised for killing are just treated so inhumanely. Like there's clips of them being whipped and pushed around. It will honestly break your heart. Not only that, but they share gross statistics, like how when you eat one hamburger, it actually is composed of multiple cows ground together. I don't know, that stuff just weirds me out. Like there's some things I just never need to know, and that was one of them. It also touches on the fast food industry and how it drastically changed throughout the years and how toxic it really is for us. I'm telling you, this documentary will change the way you see food forever. Moving on, at number 2, we have Cropsey. If you guys are obsessed with urban legends, then chances are you have heard the legend of Cropsey. This tale originated in Staten Island, where kids believed that the boogeyman named Cropsey would live in the woods and would attack and disembowel the young. Other versions say that he is an axe murderer, but no matter what version you hear, basically he's just a killer that will hunt and attack the young. Turns out that the story of Cropsey is very much real, and this documentary talks all about it. In particular, they focus on Andre Rand. In 1987, Rand was responsible for a bunch of disappearances and deaths that happened in the 1970s. He even lived in the woods part-time. So he was the real-life Cropsey everyone was talking about. So yeah, the story of Cropsey was used to scare kids into coming home before dark. Parents used it as a cautionary tale. But in the end, the story is indeed real. And in our number 1 spot, we have Seaspiracy. This documentary is currently trending on Netflix, and everyone everywhere is posting about it. This documentary discusses the negative environmental impacts of fishing. From the pollution in the ocean to overfishing and ghost nets, it shows you just how problematic the big fishing industries are. And honestly, it makes you feel sorry for the marine life that we're killing. Like, a number of whales and dolphins have been found dead with plastic in their system. It's so sad and scary. I know a lot of people who have seen this documentary and are like, "Okay, I'm never eating fish again." So it's very eye-opening, to say the least.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the royal family. The royal family has certainly had their fair share of drama this year so far, but that is not necessarily news to most people. Over the course of 18 months, from 1968 to 1969, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip allowed film crews to come in and follow their daily lives to create some sort of royal family documentary. Of course, the content of this documentary was heavily monitored by the royal family and those who deal with their public image, so the documentary itself didn't contain anything extremely dark or surprising. This documentary aired on BBC One in June of 1969, but ended up being banned by the Queen in 1972. The reason was apparently because they believed the film was in danger of killing off the monarchy, whatever that means. They explained that they felt like if they did things like this too often, that it would cheapen them by letting the magic seep out, and that people would just want to know more and more and more. I can see this point of view, but I also feel like there might be something a little more sinister going on here, especially considering everything that we do know. At the end of the day, this documentary is now actually on YouTube if you would like to and choose to go and view it.
In our 9th spot, we have The Men Who who killed Kennedy. And guys, here's your little friendly reminder to hit that thumbs up button because it really helps us out. This is a video documentary series that discusses the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It was created by British television network ITV. All 9 episodes of this documentary originally aired on the Discovery Channel. Now, any documentary dealing with death and assassinations are going to be dark. This wasn't a lighthearted docuseries, but not the entire series was banned, just the last 3 episodes that aired in 2003. Those 3 episodes were eventually pulled and are banned from ever airing again. This is due to the fact that they were way too controversial. In the final episode, it suggested that Lyndon D. Johnson, the US vice president at the time of the assassination, had something to do with his death. In the end, it was declared that the documentary was not credible and the documentary should have never aired. And they promised that they would not show those episodes again. So in this sense, it wasn't banned because it was too graphic, but because it was too controversial.
In our number 8 spot today, we have the Yes Men Fix the World. The Yes Men are a pair of activists who have a goal to raise awareness about different social and political issues. The way they go about this, however, has been highly controversial as they create films in which they impersonate people they dislike in an act that they call identity correction. In 2009, their second documentary titled The Yes Men Fix the World came out, which was the sequel to the 2003 film entitled The Yes Men. In this HBO documentary, the pair stir up controversy surrounding a few different issues, such as exposing the people who were profiting off of Hurricane Katrina, or the people who were behind the environmental disaster in Bhopal. It's not necessarily the things that they are fighting against that make people believe they're controversial, but more so the mission statement that the two share, which is that lies can expose the truth. The film, of course, has still managed to survive on past this lawsuit though, and despite being banned from release, there was a special edition of the movie that was released through good old BitTorrent.
In our 7th spot, we have Capturing the Friedmans. This HBO documentary filmed by Andrew Jarecki was released in 2003. Initially, it was meant to be a short film about children's birthday party entertainers in New York. It was titled Just a Clown. But while filming, he made a shocking discovery that completely made him shift gears. So while filming a man named David Friedman, who was a very popular clown, he learned that David's brother Jesse and his father Arnold were guilty of some very bad things to young individuals. It started back in 1987 when the US Postal Service intercepted a magazine of explicit images of young people. It was making its way over to the Friedmans' house. That's when police investigated Jesse and Arnold. The two were then given a stay-at-home order while preparing for court, and they decided to document what was going on. So they had a number of tapes that captured family dinners, private conversations, and arguments, etc. The documentary shows these home videos and follows the 2 Friedman men. Due to the film's content though, this documentary was banned in a couple of countries.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Earthlings. Earthlings was a film made in 2005 and was a documentary that focused on the way that humanity uses animals. It was definitely meant to shed a negative light on the day-to-day practices of some of the largest industries in the world that all heavily rely on animals. The footage for the film was largely captured using hidden cameras. This documentary first became controversial not because of the conversation it sparks, but because of how gruesome some of the footage was, particularly the footage from puppy mills. I honestly wouldn't even recommend viewing this footage and would much prefer a different way of educating on the horrors of these things because it really is just terrible. People were also upset because they thought that the film's director was just trying to push a vegan lifestyle on others by using scare tactics, but I'm not quite sure that this was the goal of the film at all. The film saw more controversy just last year when a Ukrainian man named Maxim Kryvosh held a bus with 13 passengers hostage and demanded, along with other things, that the president of Ukraine make a statement saying that watching the film Earthlings was recommended viewing for everyone. The president did end up releasing this statement, and thankfully all of the hostages were released without any incident, and the president's recommendation was then deleted. After this, Earthlings director did also make a statement regarding the situation, explaining that it does not endorse or condone acts of terror, and that its message is one of compassion for all beings.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with The Act of Killing. This is a 2012 documentary about the group of people who committed a bunch of murders in 1965 to 1966 as part of the Indonesian genocide. However, the film mainly centers around one of the murderers, Anwar Congo. It is said that he took the lives of 1,000 people. What made this documentary so controversial and disturbing is the fact that the film had Anwar Congo recreate some of his murders. People said in a way it was romanticizing death and violence. I mean, this dude talked in detail about the murders, like saying his preferred method of killing was to use a wire and then strangle his victims. To him, this was a neater way to kill. In the end, the Indonesian government did not like this film, saying it showcased a misleading portrayal of Indonesia.
In our number 4 spot today, we have The Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is a hugely popular tourist destination, but it is also one of the most popular spots in the whole world where people will go to take their own lives. When the filmmaker Eric Steele heard about this extremely sad statistic, he decided he wanted to make The Bridge, in which he would attempt to figure out why this was the most popular spot, but also he wanted to show people attempting or even succeeding with this action so that he could show that basically nothing is being done to try and prevent this from happening. This documentary quickly became very controversial because there were many people who believed that the film was glorifying this action, despite that most definitely not being the film's intention. People felt as though the film turned this into entertainment and normalized the action. There was also some drama between Eric and the members of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area Agency, who said that Eric didn't disclose his true intentions when he applied for a filming permit. But in the grand scheme of what this film is about, I think that this is the last thing that anyone should be worried about.
Moving on to number 3, we have Zoo. Okay. Where do I begin with this one? So basically, this whole documentary surrounds the death of Kenneth Pinyan, a man that passed away in 2005 after engaging in sexual activities with a horse. But that's not the disturbing part. The worst part is apparently the documentary tries to justify this man's actions, and it defends him, saying basically love is love, whether that's a love for another human or for an animal. An actual review said, and I quote, "The documentary spent too much effort trying to defend these actions rather than documenting what actually happened. I thought the point of documentary filmmaking was to be objective and neutral on the subject and to present the evidence and let the audience make up their own minds." So do I even have to explain why this documentary was banned in certain places? I mean, hello, it's a fairly controversial and disgusting topic.
In our number 2 spot today, we have Titicut Follies. Different films get banned for a multitude of reasons, which usually comes down to the topics being controversial or up for debate, but this specific documentary was banned because of the fact that it was just absolutely horrifying to every audience. This extremely important but upsetting documentary was made in 1964 and explored the life inside the Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane. As you can imagine, life for the people living inside of this hospital was terrible, and this documentary did not hold back on shining the light. It showed the neglect that the inmates faced from their caretakers, as well as even more horrible things that they had to endure. This film was originally banned because some people believed they needed to protect the identity of the people portrayed in the film, which I understand, but that does seem kind of backwards and like it would only be benefiting the people who desperately needed to be exposed. In 1991, however, the ban on this film was lifted and people were able to see the reality that many people at this hospital faced every day.
And in our number 1 spot, we have Faces of Death. This film is banned in 40+ countries. That's just how gruesome it actually is. In 1978, this documentary was released and people were horrified at how graphic it was. The film contained real footage of dead or dying humans and animals. In one scene, you see a body being sliced open in an autopsy. Another scene shows a man being electrocuted. And in another, you see a monkey get beat to death by a hammer. Yeah, they showed all that and more in this film. It's basically like they collected the most disturbing real-life footages from all over the world and compiled them together for this film. As a result of its very graphic content, the movie was banned in 40+ countries. Starting off this this countdown, we have Let There Be Light. The 1946 doc Let There Be Light was an educational film about the post-traumatic stress soldiers feel after returning home from war. On June 25th, 1945, Major John Houston was assigned by the Army Signal Corps to create a documentary on this. He visited a bunch of Army hospitals and saw the suffering these soldiers went through. This film was meant to inform the public how hard it is for veterans to fit back into society after what they have gone through. But in the end, the film was banned by the government for a couple of years. It was finally released in the 1980s, but then it was banned by the army because apparently it was too controversial, and also because it was scaring new recruits. On top of that, they wanted their army to seem like great big warriors, and that when Americans got sent to war, they would come back stronger and a huge hero. This documentary went against that.
In our number 9 spot today, we have The Kingmaker. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. The documentary called The Kingmaker was directed by Lauren Greenfield, and it has been banned in the south of Thailand. This film is about the life of Imelda Marcos, who is the wife of the 10th president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. The documentary apparently details not only her greed, corruption, and brutality, but also how she influenced her husband and his ruling. It also shows her desire to recuperate her family's public image to return them to what she would call glory. While it is unclear if this really is true, apparently authorities have said that the ban is taking place only because of the poster and title for the movie, not due to the content. A ban over a poster seems a little extreme, but hey, maybe that really is the case.
In our 8th spot, we have Seaspiracy. Shortly after this documentary was published, it went viral online, and a number of countries banned it. This documentary discusses the negative environmental impact of fishing. From pollution in the ocean to overfishing and ghost nets, it just shows you how problematic the big fishing industries are. It honestly makes you feel sorry for the marine life that we're killing, and kind of makes you not want to eat fish anymore. Like, it shows you that a number of whales and dolphins have been found dead with plastic in their systems. But countries banned it so their citizens don't know exactly what is happening out there to the oceans.
In our number 7 spot today, we have Sambal Belacan in San Francisco. In 1997, Madeline Lim made a 25-minute documentary called Sambal Belacan in San Francisco about 3 Singaporean lesbians, and while she dreamed of being able to screen it at festivals in her home country of Singapore, it unfortunately was banned from being viewed there. Her film was winning awards and accolades around the world, but the one place she really wanted to show it wouldn't let her. Madeline wanted to speak to the LGBTQIA+ community in Singapore through her film, as it explored the lesbian experience of Singaporean women and the things they had to endure. In a small turn of events, 23 years after the release of the film, just last year the film was screened for a one-time screening to a limited audience in Singapore. The movie was shown with the highest rating for mature audiences, and while it's not a complete lift on the ban, it is a step in the right direction.
In our 6th spot, we have Under the Dome. Under the Dome is a 2015 documentary all about the air pollution and air quality in China. It exposes how toxic the air quality is for people living in China. It also talks about how the government needs to enforce regulations and needs to do more to combat this problem. On the first couple of days after the documentary was released online, it got more than 150 million views, which led to the government banning it and removing it from all Chinese video websites. Why? Well, it exposed a real problem that they don't want to deal with. In fact, this isn't the first time that China has downplayed their pollution problem. During a summit in 2014, it was revealed that their pollution was at 6 times the level deemed safe by the World Health Organization. But they removed that data from the US Embassy's reading.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Haxan. I actually don't know how to say that for sure. Haxan is a half documentary, half fantasy film that comes to us all the way from 1922 when it was first released. Directed by Benjamin Christensen, this documentary aimed to show what it was like during 15th century witch hunts, which sounds both terrifying and extremely interesting, and is what Benjamin calls one of the biggest catastrophes in the history history of mankind. Apparently this film actually is one that laid the foundation for horror movies to come and really pushed the film industry forward, which is quite a feat. This movie, however, ended up being banned in the United States and a few other countries as well because it was deemed too disturbing for public viewing. Benjamin never seemed bothered by the controversial reviews of the film, which truly is a testament to him making the film as he envisioned it needed to be made.
Coming in at number 4, we have India's Daughter. Just a quick warning, this documentary talks about some pretty heavy topics. This documentary discusses the Delhi gang case that happened on December 16th, 2012. On that day, a 23-year-old student was returning home after watching the film The Life of Pi with her friend. While on their way home, she was brutally attacked and was taken advantage of. It was so bad that she passed away days later in the hospital. So it was a pretty intense and heavy and serious documentary. In the end, it was banned in India. The government claimed that the documentary was trying to conspire against India on an international platform, which obviously it wasn't the documentary's intention at all. It also apparently violated a bunch of laws in India, like actually exposing who the victim of this horrific act was and showing images of her. Another reason it was banned because they didn't want it to cause public outrage or inspire criminals.
In our number 3 spot today, we have Jack Johnson versus James Jeffries. This isn't exactly what you think of when we say the word documentary, but I absolutely needed to include it on this list today. On December 26, 1908, Jack Johnson defeated the defending heavyweight champion, Tommy Burns, and became the first black heavyweight champion of the world, which is incredible and should absolutely be celebrated, right? Unfortunately, this was 1908, so it was seen as a threat, and immediately they began trying to find another white person he could fight in order to beat Jack and win the title, and this person was James Jeffries. The fight took place on July 4th, 1910, and this is back in a time when prize fighting was on the rise, and since this fight was so huge, it was of course video recorded. Usually black men wouldn't have even been able to compete for a world title, so it was of course controversial news when he not only competed but won twice. Immediately after the second win, angry racist mob violence began throughout the country, which led to the video of the fight being banned. But this led to some of them being hurt or even killed by these racist people. The fight became notorious all around the world and was one of the most talked about fights for years to come.
In our second spot, we have Plandemic. Released in 2020, this documentary is just one big conspiracy theory video that spreads misinformation about COVID-19. The film features Judy Mikovits, a discredited former researcher who is also an anti-vaxxer. In the documentary, she spreads a bunch of lies, like how she tried to speak up about the truth of COVID-19 and how she was silenced and jailed as a result. In reality, she was just fired from her research job and was arrested after she took a bunch of lab materials and her computer, and then she fled. In the video, she makes several claims like wearing a mask and washing your hands increases the risk of getting the virus, and that the virus is just one big government plan, that the vaccines will be used to then control everyone. She also claims that the cells used in the vaccine can cause cancer, which is also false. As a result of the misinformation spread in the documentary, it has been banned. Any video on the documentary will also be removed, and same with any tweet about it. So let's hope that this video doesn't get removed.
In our number 1 spot today, we have Jenin. Earlier this year, an Israeli court blocked a documentary about the 2002 massacre between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians in the city of Jenin at a refugee camp. The documentary, which is called Jenin, was first brought to the court by a soldier who is in the film. He filed a lawsuit because in the film he's accused of stealing from an elderly Palestinian man, which he claims is untrue. The court not only ordered in favor of the soldier and ruled that the director of the documentary pay both him and the court expenses, but the court also said that they found some other events in the documentary to be untrue. The encounter in 2002 was very deadly and destructive and caused a lot of harm, and there was even a Human Rights Watch investigation. When the documentary was first released, it was banned in Israel, but a Supreme Court later overturned that ban. The documentary is told entirely by survivors of the situation, which is obviously very important. The documentary is now banned again in Israel, but there is no ban on the film on YouTube.
Starting us off at number 10, Making a Murderer. Okay, seriously, if you've never seen this documentary, I've talked about it in so many of these top 10 videos. I'm obsessed with it. Well, if you haven't watched it, it means you've been living under a rock, or two, you're Stephen Avery. All jokes aside, if you haven't binged the series yet, what the heck are you waiting for? Are you crazy?
We went through this 20 years ago, and we're going through it now again.
In this criminal justice system, good luck.
You are probably the most dangerous individual ever to set foot in this courtroom.
Making a Murderer examines the life of Stephen Avery, who spent a total of 18 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. But that's not the entire story. After he was released, he was given $400,000 for the wrongful conviction, but just days after he was a free man, he was accused of another murder and he was sentenced to spend life in prison. He was charged with the murder of Teresa Halbach, kidnapping, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. His 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey, well, he was 16 like years ago, he's much older now. He was also arrested for being associated with the murder, and he was convicted after he gave a false confession. He had no idea what he was saying. His IQ is very low. I feel so bad for him. Well, part 2 of the series have recently been released, and a high-profile lawyer is now on the case, and she has some pretty compelling evidence, so I know that you're gonna want to see what happens next. Into the Abyss climbs onto this list at number 9. Michael Perry and Jason Burkett, well, they went for a joyride one night in a red Camaro, and they ended up being charged with 3 murders back in 2001. But this documentary isn't about trying to get the state to reopen their cases. It's about looking into capital punishment and life on death row. Michael Perry was interviewed 8 days before he was scheduled to die, so we really get to see his vulnerability and weaknesses. We also see interviews of the survivors, witnesses, and police officers, which makes this documentary even more dark and pretty emotional.
So she let him in the house to use the telephone, and while he was doing that, Michael Perry stepped out of the laundry room, and that's when he shot her. This was the vehicle that Michael Perry and Jason Burkett was after. 3 people died for this car.
The confession tapes brings us to number 8.
They made me believe I killed someone I loved. They made me tell my mama I done it. And I didn't do it.
Innocent until proven guilty. Well, that's not always the case. This documentary will have you questioning our criminal justice system. The Confessions Tapes is a 7-episode series that focuses on innocent people confessing to crimes they didn't commit. And I know what you must be thinking. Well, how can someone actually confess to something if they didn't do it? Well, when you're being interrogated for hours and hours without a lawyer and given false promises, it's actually very common to confess. Strong alibis and lack of DNA evidence doesn't matter. Once the cops think you're guilty, they're trained in emotional deception in order to get you to confess to gruesome crimes that you've never even thought about committing. If you watch this series, trust me, you won't be disappointed. Now, in at number 7, we have The Keepers.
Bigger and deeper than we can imagine. The story is not the nuns killing. The story is the cover-up of the nun story.
We've all heard stories about priests using their authorities in order to take advantage of young children because they were protected by the church. And now this documentary sheds light on a cold case crime story that still needs to be solved. The story focuses on a 26-year-old nun who was a very popular teacher at a Catholic high school in Baltimore. She was murdered in 1969 and her body was found in the woods. And now, nearly 50 years later, people are starting to discover what really happened to Sister Kathy. This documentary shows us the horrifying truth about Catholic and government corruption that exists within churches, and we hear true stories about survivors telling us what really happened behind closed doors. I Am a Killer, well, I'm just saying a title of a Netflix TV show. Well, I Am a Killer is next up at number 6. This is a 10-episode documentary of scary interviews from convicted murderers. So if you've ever wanted to know what brings someone to murder, then this is a show for you. We've talked about wrongful convictions and unsolved murders, but this documentary is somewhat even more chilling. Each episode focuses on a man convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death row. None of them deny that they've committed brutal murders. Instead, this documentary shows us what really goes on in their minds.
If you ever thought about taking somebody's life, you better think about it long and hard. To walk that road right there is a lot of heartache. You may think you're tough, but really ain't nothing if you're a murderer.
Alright, number 5, evil genius. No, I'm not talking about myself. I'm a genius, just not the evil part. Okay, I'm a pretty big dum-dum. Well, this one's about one of the craziest bank robberies ever. Back in 2003 in Erie, Pennsylvania, a pizza delivery man walked into a PNC bank with a collar bomb around his neck, and he was carrying a gun that was disguised as a cane. And he handed the teller a note, and he grabbed a lollipop before strolling out of the bank. A few minutes later, the bomb exploded and he died. That's when things took a turn and got even more weird.
Told police that he was forced to rob the bank.
The FBI believe that whoever built the collar is patient and secretive.
Brian Wells said he was supposed to go on a scavenger hunt.
And he was supposed to go from point A to point B to point C, where the keys would be given him to release this bomb.
I watched this documentary, it's really good. Well, it was discovered that this pizza guy was being sent on an elaborate scavenger hunt in order to defuse the bomb around his neck. You're going to want to watch this true crime documentary because, trust me, things get really intense, and it's just like, some things are like, how did that even happen? And in this documentary, there was a man who hid a dead body in his freezer for years, and a mentally ill woman who had a lot of boyfriends who all died in mysterious circumstances. At the end of this documentary, you're wondering, like, is this woman the genius behind everything? The jinx takes us to number 4. Robert Durst was accused of murdering his wife, a close friend, and his former neighbor. Apparently the final episode of this series almost broke the internet. So I won't be giving away any spoilers, but here's what I have to say if you don't have any plans tonight. You should start watching this show.
Compelling evidence.
This case was not investigated the way it should have been.
A lot of smoke doesn't necessarily mean fire, but I think there's a lot of smoke here.
Not tell the whole truth. Nobody tells the whole truth.
This was such a groundbreaking series because before this documentary was released, Robert Durst refused to do any interviews with journalists. So this was actually the first time that he sat down for more than 20 hours over the course of several years in order to participate in this documentary. As it turns out, his cooperation might have been the biggest mistake of his life. And I'll just leave it as that. Mommy, Dad, and Dearest comes in to number 3. This insane documentary is about the lives of a mother and daughter, and their names is Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. The mother had an abusive mental illness called Munchausen. Basically, the mother convinced her daughter that she was severely ill, physically disabled, and unable to walk. This resulted in Gypsy undergoing several unnecessary invasive surgeries and taking a bunch of medications that she didn't even need. And this went on for nearly 20 years. It ended up when Gypsy killed her mother with the help of her boyfriend. Yeah, this documentary is very intense.
She had leukemia, and she was having seizures, and she had to be tube fed.
And then gradually that story fell apart.
Things are not always as they appear.
How do you kill your own mother?
In at number 2 is Paradise Lost trilogy. 3 teenagers were accused of murdering 3 young boys, and they were notoriously known as the West Memphis 3. They were convicted because they liked Metallica's music, they read Stephen King's novel, and the police were able to coerce one of the boys into falsely confessing. The teenager who confessed had a low IQ, and he was very vulnerable when he was being interrogated for 12 hours. So as a result of all of that and some sketchy evidence, one of them was sentenced to death and the other ones got life in prison. But the story doesn't end there. Celebrities and musicians, well, they believed that they were innocent, so they held several fundraisers in the behalf that they were wrongly convicted. And in July of 2007, there was shocking new evidence that was brought into the case. I won't spoil anything, but you guys need to watch.
Everybody in the town and in the courtroom and on the jury are all blinded by their fantasies about satanic cults.
The criminal confessions are too many manipulated by the police.
I'm going to be wondering if the true killers were actually captured.
And this staircase tops this list at number 1. If I were to say like a TV show that's better than Making a Murderer or better than any of these shows on here, it's this one. It is so good. In 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead at the bottom of her staircase. Her husband found her body and quickly called 911. He told the operator that she had an accident and that she was still breathing. Shortly after, Michael Peterson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. This documentary follows a trial, and it is full of twists, turns, and shocking moments.
Shift the foundations of my beliefs in the justice system.
The system is flawed and it needs to change.
This is contamination in the crime scene.
The DA's trying to say that our dad killed our mother.
There's no murder weapon. There's no motive.
But we're sitting behind our dad.